Mad Max Fury Road almost starred one of the greatest rappers of all time. Mad Max Fury Road turns 10 years old this week, so here's some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind Fury Road starts in rural Queensland, Australia in the 1950s, where future doctor and filmmaker George Miller grew up. When he was young, Miller witnessed a number of car accidents and lost at least 3 friends in auto crashes. In the late 60s and early 70s, Miller would then become a medical doctor. He worked in an ER in Sydney, where the injuries and death left a huge impression on him. While in residency as a doctor, Miller turned his passion for movies into a more active hobby. In 1971, he met amateur filmmaker Byron Kennedy, and they became collaborators, first producing an award-winning short film called Violence in Cinema Part 1, and then in the mid-70s, they brought on writer James McCausland, and the three of them started putting together the original Mad Max. They self-funded the movie for about $400,000. They cast recent acting school graduate Mel Gibson in the lead role, and then they shot the film Down and Dirty in 1977 and 78 in and around Melbourne. Mad Max hit theaters in 1979 and became a phenomenon, grossing $100 million worldwide, which broke the record for the most profitable movie ever percentage-wise. And it would hold on to that record until the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999. Miller then made Mad Max 2 pretty soon after, shooting in early 1981 and releasing that December. By 1982, George Miller had quit medicine and became a filmmaker full-time. The third film, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, followed in 1985. But then it took 30 years for us to get another Mad Max movie. So what happened? In 1987, Miller wondered if he could make a Mad Max movie that was almost a continuous chase. But then he got distracted making The Witches of Eastwick, Lorenzo's Oil, Babe, and 40,000 Years of Dreaming. Finally, in 1998, he got a new idea for a Mad Max sequel. He thought, what if the violent marauders were fighting not for oil or for material goods, but for human beings? Over the next few years, Miller worked with 5 different storyboard artists to hash out this movie visually beginning to end. He did this before writing the screenplay because the movie wasn't going to have much dialogue, and the visuals for this nearly continuous chase film were the most important thing. Miller and the artist created about 3,500 storyboard panels, which is roughly equal to the amount of shots in the finished film. Then he brought on Nico Lathoris and Brendan McCarthy to co-write the screenplay. 20th Century Fox picked up the project and put it into pre-production in the early 2000s. Mel Gibson was going to return as Max, and Sigourney Weaver considered playing the female lead, which would later become Furiosa. A large amount of work was put in during this pre-production cycle, and they even built some of the vehicles for the film that would eventually get used later. But then 9/11 happened and production was put on hold, because as Miller explained, the American dollar collapsed against the Australian dollar, causing their budget to skyrocket. They also had plans to shoot the film in Namibia, but those fell through because of new security concerns, plus travel and shipping restrictions leading up to the Iraq War. So while he was waiting around to make Fury Road, Miller was also developing Happy Feet. And by 2003, Miller said he had to commit to Happy Feet because we had the digital facility booked to do it. So then Miller spent the next 3 years making Happy Feet for Warner Brothers. It hit theaters in 2006. But you know what else happened in 2006? Mel Gibson's public meltdown. So that, plus Gibson now being too old to play the character, led George Miller to move on without him. In 2007, George Miller considered replacing Mel Gibson with Eminem. The director apparently loved his performance in 8 Mile, but Eminem didn't want to leave the US for a months-long film shoot, so he turned it down. In the late 2000s, Warner Brothers brought Miller back to make Happy Feet 2, but he was still thinking about Fury Road, and for a while there, he considered making it an animated film. But then, in 2009, George Miller revealed that the movie was back on in live action. Warner Brothers had officially picked up the project from Fox, and we soon learned that Tom Hardy was in negotiations to play Max, with Charlize Theron playing the female lead. By the way, Miller had considered a number of other actors for Max, including Michael Fassbender, Joel Kinnaman, Heath Ledger, and Eric Bana at one point or another, while the final auditions came down to Armie Hammer, Jeremy Renner, and Tom Hardy, with Tom Hardy winning out. In 2009, the director said cameras were going to start rolling in August 2010 in Broken Hill, New South Wales, Australia. Spoiler alert, they did not. July 2010 then rolled around, and Miller said, actually, we're shooting 2 movies back to back, Mad Max Fury Road and Mad Max Furiosa. Spoiler alert, they did not. And then unusually heavy rains caused wildflowers to grow in the desert outside Broken Hill, which means it would no longer make sense to film there. So they said, okay, let's shoot in Namibia instead, starting November 2011. A lot of detail was put into the film's design and aesthetics. For example, the filmmakers wrote an internally consistent history of the universe that explained the film's look and justified its use of hot rods. As I mentioned, production designer Colin Gibson and his team started building the vehicles in the early 2000s, and they built 150 vehicles total, all of which were fully functional. 88 survived the shoot, while the rest were destroyed as intended on camera. The war war rig was made by combining a Tatra 815 and a Chevrolet Fleetmaster with a Volkswagen Beetle fused to the hull. Warner Brothers put up a budget of $185 million, though there's a little bit more to say about that in a minute. And then Mad Max Fury Road finally went into production July 2012 in Namibia, with most of the filming taking place in Dorob National Park, though they also shot on stages at Cape Town Film Studios in South Africa. Miller originally considered shooting the movie with 3D cameras, but due to budget issues and worries that the desert would destroy the equipment, they shot it in digital 2D instead and converted it to 3D in post. Cinematographer John Seal and his crew used 6 Arri Alexa Plus cameras, 4 Alexa M cameras, and they also ran a number of consumer-level Canon 5Ds and Olympus EP5s as crash cams for the action sequences. These cameras were cheap enough that in case one of them broke, they could easily replace it at any electronics store. Because Miller envisioned a fast-paced editing style, he asked Seal to use a lot of center framing so the audience wouldn't have to search hard for each shot's point of interest. According to Miller, 90% of the effects in the film were achieved practically. The Doof Wagon and the Doof Warrior's guitar were fully functional, including the fire. The movie employed more than 150 stunt performers, including some from Cirque du Soleil. Miller also brought in Vagina Monologues playwright Eve Ensler to serve as an on-set advisor, and she helped coach the actors on issues of violence against women. But not everything went smoothly on set. The desert environment was extremely difficult on everyone, and there was a lot of tension between Miller, Hardy, and Theron. Miller had a very specific vision in his head for the film, and that didn't give the actors a lot of leeway. Tom Hardy also then had issues with punctuality and would often show up late to set, which frustrated Charlize Theron, who was very disciplined and always on time. Over the years, they've both taken responsibility for the feud, and the actress later said, "The two of them were like two parents in the front of the car. We were either fighting or we were icing each other, and the crew had to deal with it in the back. It was horrible. We should not have done that. We should have been better." Filming also went over budget, so Warner Brothers sent an executive to Namibia to keep the production on track. The studio then forced the film to wrap production on December 8th, 2012, before any of the Citadel scenes at the beginning and end of the movie had been shot. That's right, they wrapped production without a beginning and an ending. But then some new executives took over at Warner Brothers, and they allowed the film to go back into production to get those Citadel scenes. So they shot for 4 additional months outside Sydney in fall 2013. Film editor and George Miller's wife, Margaret Sixel, edited the movie. Miller had gathered 480 hours of footage total, which took Sixel 3 months to watch. The final film contains 2,700 cuts across its 120 minutes. Most features have 1,000 to 2,000 cuts. And while Miller emphasized practical effects, the movie contains more than 2,000 digital effect shots. VFX were used to alter lighting and time of day, weather, adjust terrain, and add in background plates. Sound designer Mark Mangini viewed the war rig as an allegory for Moby Dick, so he layered the vehicle's truck sounds with whale calls. And when it's hit with harpoons and milk sprays out, he used noises of whales exhaling from their blowholes. When the war rig is finally destroyed, he used slow-down bear growls. Hans Zimmer was attached to do the score at one point, but Junkie XL ended up composing it. Miller and Sixel then ended up cutting 2 versions of the movie, a PG-13 version which they were contractually obligated to deliver, and his full R-rated vision. Warner Brothers then screen tested both versions, and the latter won out, so that's the one the studio released. Mad Max Fury Road opened on 3,702 screens in the US on May 15th, 2015. It did $45 million domestic opening weekend, falling to number 2 behind Pitch Perfect 2. It ended up grossing $380 million worldwide, which is a lot, but due to its high cost, The Hollywood Reporter estimated that Warner Brothers lost $20 to $40 million on the movie's theatrical run. That said, as of 2023, it had sold more than 3 million copies on home video, bringing in $56.4 million in sales. Critics loved Fury Road. Today, 97% of the 439 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. It was nominated for 10 Oscars, winning 6, the most for any Australian movie ever. More than 170 critics put it on their top 10 lists for the year, while the New York Times, Empire, and The Independent have all named it among the 20 best movies of the 21st century. Scholars of women's studies and disability studies have praised the movie for its empowering positive portrayals. And in the 2010s, Miller said he had enough story material written to make 2 prequels to Fury Road. One was Furiosa, which he eventually did make with Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth. It came out in 2024, and while it was praised by critics, getting 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, it failed to make an impact at the box office, and according to Deadline, it lost $119 million. The other prequel was going to be about Max, called The Wasteland, focused on the character's journey through the wasteland in the year leading up to Fury Road. George Miller says he's still interested in making it, despite Furiosa underperforming, telling Vulture, "It's not something I would do next because there's 2 things I'm keen to do next, but if for whatever reason the planets align, you can never tell. Some things fall into place and some things don't. So all I can say is, we'll see." And if you made it to the end of this video, leave a witness me in the comments.